There was a lot of protests over the weekend, pro-Palestinian protests over the weekend. Not too much to say about it, really. I mean, there was that horrible story today about someone hitting a 7-year-old in the face with a shovel. Again, though, I have seen some tweets going around, people going violent, Zionists or whatever. It's like, no, and let's be fair, an imbalanced, mentally unwell human being. Because if it was an individual from the other side who did it, we wouldn't want to take responsibility for it to represent all of them. So we won't worry too much about that. It seems to be an isolated incident from someone who is not well, as opposed to necessarily a accurate depiction of what everyone would do who was protesting, the counter protest, or the other way around, whichever it was. But here's a little bit of imagery from we don't need the noise, I don't think, off New Zealand Herald. A large crowd gathers in Auckland Aotea Square to protest against the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. And the thing is, right, all of these protests are calling for a ceasefire. And yes, in some spaces, the chant was used that some people find abhorrent. Don't need to have that debate tonight. But in general, you've got a whole bunch of people calling for a ceasefire. A whole bunch of people calling to stop Palestinians having apartment blocks land on top of them because of Israeli missiles. And then you've got another group of people who are going, nah, let Israel do what they want. And those group of people are known as Destiny Church members. So this will just show you something that's going on and the victim mentality, the snowflake victim mentality coming out of Brian Tamaki at the moment. So this went up yesterday. He calls One News anti-Semitic. Why does he call them anti-Semitic? Because they didn't cover his protest. One News doesn't report pro-Israel protest. One News reports pro-Palestinian protests. So that makes One News anti-Semitic. But just to echo how much of a snowflake princess he is, One News is anti-Semitic. Wait for it. New Zealand Herald is anti-Semitic. And of course, News Talk ZB is anti-Semitic. Because they didn't give him the coverage that he wanted, and they didn't report on them. So you've got people going around doing that. I think one of the biggest parts of the story, and I will play one more clip, this was from the AM show this morning, is Macron has come out calling for a ceasefire, asking Christopher Luxon, would you call for a ceasefire? And he won't say yes. He won't say, yes, I call for a ceasefire.
Here is a very important thing to ask you about, actually. President Macron has been one of the first leaders to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and he's asking for other leaders to follow suit. We've had demonstrations here over the weekend that seem to be growing, calling for our leaders to say the same thing. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I mean, I think every political leader would like to see a pathway to a ceasefire. But
So, for clarity, a pathway to a ceasefire is not a ceasefire. It means we'd like to see something in the future. So Luxon is saying, yes, we'd like to see something in the future. Now, just remember the reality. What that means is people keep dying today. People keep dying today. When you talk about something in the future would be good, but a pathway to a ceasefire is not a ceasefire. And he'll come up and he'll dance around and he'll both sides it, but he won't say, yes, there should be a ceasefire. Even if you're on Israel's side, a humanitarian response would be, yes, there should be a ceasefire, but he can't do it.
Here's the thing that people need to understand around a ceasefire. First and foremost, you need both parties to agree to want to be in a ceasefire. 2, it actually has to be across the whole of the geography of the region. And 3, it has to be into a pathway that gets you into a diplomacy and into peaceful resolution. And the harsh reality of it at the moment is neither Hamas or Israel actually want a ceasefire. So we can call for it and we can keep pushing towards that pathway. That is important. But what is important right now is those humanitarian pauses that we've seen taking place over the last few days that we've called for. That's important. It's making sure that Hamas should be releasing the hostages and not using civilian shields. And Israel and Hamas both need to act within obligations of international law, humanitarian law. So, ultimately, let's be clear, military action is not going to deliver peace in the Middle East. It's going to be restarting the Middle East peace process. And so, yes, we'd like to get to a pathway of a ceasefire.
Pathway of a ceasefire, but he won't commit to a ceasefire. So the Christian leader who follows this character called the Prince of Peace is basically saying, no, I'm not saying he's okay with, But his response means more people die, more children die, more women die, more innocents die, looking for some nebulous word in the future that may or may not happen about a pathway to something, rather than saying, yes, ceasefire now. Like, that's what I'm saying. We played a clip, you were with us last week when we played James O'Brien, where he talked to this lady who was pro-Israel, and go back and listen to the clip if you didn't see it, and got to the end of the conversation, and he had a chat with her, and he asked her if she would call for a ceasefire, and she said Israel has the right to defend itself. And then James O'Brien, the talkback host in the UK, pointed out, so therefore the people, which were the protesters that you're calling violent and angry, are the ones calling for death to stop, and you, who claim to have empathy, you, Mr. Luxon, who claim to have empathy, are not calling for a ceasefire. That means you are calling for more people to die. So those Palestinian protesters in the weekend, they were calling for people to stop dying. Our next Prime Minister is I don't want to say calling for people to die, but the call he is making about a potential future pathway to ceasefire means more people will die. Who's got more empathy? The Palestinians, the Muslims, the people who are supporting a ceasefire in the weekend, who are shouting and yelling, or our next Prime Minister who refuses to go, a ceasefire is immediate and essential to stop people dying? Who has more empathy?
I'm absolutely shocked that a CEO of an airline and a middle manager of Axe body spray has the moral fortitude of a bowl of custard and to stand there and go, well, we don't actually need a ceasefire because you might not know this and the people might not know this, but two people have to come to an agreement over actually wanting it. Well, no fucking shit. But maybe the international community can fucking pull up their pants all at once and go, we demand one.
But I don't
we
know if I
demand
agree
one.
with
What
that.
you're doing is unacceptable. If I see someone beating someone in the street, I don't go, hey, at some point you got to stop wailing on this guy and ask him if he wants you to stop. You know, you break up the fight.
I think there could be a way.
He's an amateur.
We talked about this last week. I think there could be a way. Israel, remember we talked about Israel's like the 30-year-old man beating up on the 12-year-old boy. Now, that's not to be dismissive or disrespectful to the Palestinians, but the amount of power and stuff they've got in this conflict, right? Now, I think the solution is really simple, but Israel won't do this. As Israel goes, 72-hour ceasefire. If the hostages aren't released in that 72 hours, or if a single rocket comes over the wall, the ceasefire is over. So that you don't need two sides to agree to do that. You can look to an end, but the truth is, Israel is not looking to an end. They are looking to, and someone put in the chat before something about it'll be when all the Palestinians are dead, according to a ceasefire.
There's definitely a ceasefire if they're all dead.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. They've run out of people to murder.
And look, I think we're pretty fair enough in this conversation. We haven't supported Hamas on any stage. In fact, the exact opposite. But the people in Palestine and the people in Israel, the citizens who are being impacted by this, are the ones we're thinking about. And at the moment, the citizens in Palestine are being affected probably 1,000 to 1, maybe more. Maybe 1,000 to 0, maybe 100 to 0 at the moment. I don't know the death toll. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying it's a counting game, but I don't know what the death toll of citizens in Israel is at the moment, like in this current conflict, but I suspect it's not many, if any, as Scribe once said. But there's a way that Israel, you don't need both sides to agree. Israel can go 72 hours, ceasefire, hostages back, one rocket over the wall, we keep going, or we keep going after 72 hours. There's a ceasefire.
I think that's personally that's terrible look into the sort of the sort of shadow that Luxon can potentially cast on our international relationships. He's not equipped for this. He is an amateur. He is a hobbyist politician. And he's not going to be the one that makes these big calls. And we've spoken about this of like, we have nothing to lose here. Like, if we're such a small country that it doesn't matter what we think, or the way that he's saying is, oh, well, we've got to our opinion is so important that we've got to carefully mull over all the pros and cons. No, just call for a ceasefire. That's it. It doesn't come down one way or the other. It's like, hey, Israel, I think you've made your fucking point, and now you're coming off a bit psychotic. You don't have to say that. You can just go, there are horrible things happening. We can all see that. Stop.